Thanks so much, Miguel. Really appreciate it. I mean, for me personally, I was traveling so much the last few years that this is almost a relief. Of course, I wanted to be cured. Of course, I want no one to be ill. But that I get hopefully 11 months, maybe 12 months to rest at home, I'm personally very happy. But this, of course, is not just about the person. It's about how we see our planet. So my kind of opening take, and I apologize, no PowerPoint, no visuals. I'm really not there to do that yet, hopefully soon. So what I want to talk about, I remember 12 years ago during the global financial crisis, the Financial Times had a great article said, we know there's a crisis, we don't really know what it is. What is it? And so they said it's a crisis in search of a narrative. Is it a mortgage crisis? Is it a banking crisis? Is it a really financial crisis? Is it a crisis of the rise of China? Or is this a crisis of capitalism? So there was some debates. What is it? Once we figure out what the story is, then we look for reality. And the story defines reality, I would say. Ultimately, the decision was, the political decision, the policy decision was we need to save Wall Street and not Main Street. So this didn't come out to be a deeper crisis of capitalism. It came really to be, here's a minor crisis, a debt crisis, let's fix it. My sense we're in this situation again today. Those of you who have read on the French Revolution, you know there was a moment when time was plastic. No one could predict what was next, even a week, a day even. So we're in this plastic time where there's many possibilities. As Arundhati Roy says, a portal has opened. Again, my colleague Peter Black, I work with him in Biosecurity Australia, Department of Agriculture for at least 18 years now. He said earlier pandemics force us to make structural changes in the world system. And I think this is where we are. So what are some of these narratives? Narrative one is obvious, stop the spread, flatten the curve. Every country is doing that, so I won't say much about that. Narrative number two is, of course, this is a disease, let's find the cure. Let's pay the people to find the cure. One Spanish biological researcher, she said, you're looking for a treatment now. And she said it with some anger, go ask Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi to find the cure. She was commenting how they get paid millions and she gets paid very little. So this was the sense that the future of this is resolved by open science, science and technology, artificial intelligence, the innovative companies, they make the difference. So this is a technological innovation. So that's kind of discourse number two. As we go wider, it becomes, wait a second, we solve it in a year through a cure, but what about the next disease? Are we really able to ban wet markets? Can we stop the eating of exotic animals? Can we change what's called masculinities in East Asia, where people are searching for alternative exotic health potions? So this is not just legislation, there's bounty hunters that make a lot of money on this. We have to change legislation and we need ways globally to work on this. I've run many workshops for Interpol, and my argument with them has always been, this is time for Earthpol. This is not international. This is a WHO with teeth and an Earthpol which can monitor the movement of animals and goods that can hurt us. So this now we got wider. But now many are arguing it's much deeper than this. This is about the end of meat. As you know, Sheikh Yamani said, it was not due to lack of stone that the Stone Age ended. It won't be due to lack of oil that the oil age ends, and it won't be due to lack of meat that the era of meat ends. So this is not just about wildlife, but factory farming. When will the next pandemic emerge? How do we change our relationship with what we eat? How do we change our relationship with current production models? So this becomes much wider and deeper. So this is the fourth discourse. Flatten the curve, disease and cure, next disease, and what's beyond meat. Now, if you go wider, this goes to, wait a second, the image they have is there's one fish, another fish, a bigger fish, and now there's a big shark coming, which is, of course, the shark of climate change. So we now see leadership as possible. My own daughter said, wait a second, so if we're focused, if we have leadership and we act globally, we can solve problems. Why can't we do this with climate change? We know young people will face that for the rest of the century. So the COVID-19 is a dwarf crisis. The real one, this is a practice crisis, ensuring we go through scenarios. we figure out emergence, we understand what's coming next, and we start to focus global energy on actually solving climate change. So this is a crisis of leadership. It has nothing to do with pathogens. It has nothing to do with technology. It's can we focus our leadership the way we see with some leaders, like of course our Prime Minister of New Zealand. So can we make the shift to a greener planet? That becomes the operating question. Is this the end of the fossil fuel era, the beginning of the solar era? So now we go wider and wider with the discourse. Now there's many writers that say, yes, it's about climate change, but this is all still nested in one thing alone. That one thing alone is capitalism. It's been a 500-year system. It's been marvelous for many people. It's transformed the world. It's been not so good for others. So the question there is, everyone senses, wait a second, this could seriously damage the world economy. This is not just a pause. If you've seen my scenarios, there's the pause scenario, which is, well, we take a year break and next year the markets roar. Next year we're all on our airplanes. Next year we go back to business as usual, but with more energy. This is saying, no, we need a global health transformation, which is part of the shift of global capitalism. If we don't do this, this is just going to be not 1 year, 3 years, 7 years. This is the grand malaise. Because we solve this, we have even greater inequity. The inequity keeps on increasing. So instead of a world where money is rolling, everyone's working on trust, and the money keeps on rolling everywhere for everyone, it's constipated. So this means it's transforming global capitalism. And we can see even Spain said universal basic income, even after the crisis, may become law. So they're already thinking through what's the safety net we need. Right now we have a safety net, but with holes. How do we go from a safety net to a springboard where the safety net helps us innovate, helps us create even more value? So this is basically a challenge of the mantra of the world capitalist system, which is more, more, more for the few. So we challenge uneven development, and we start to imagine a world after capitalism. So will this be global cooperatives, globalized industries with some markets? Will be global governance? What will this mean? So this is part of the debate right now. I've been working with the Proud movement for now 30, 40 years, saying actually we need to create a new economic system where the money flows, there's more cooperatives, there's a bottom, a minimum, there's a maximum. I have no problem people making 5, 10 million, but the discourses are very saying, well, once you get to a few billion, do you really need that? Is that the wisest use of capital? Is that the wisest use of nature, in effect? So this becomes the discourse, the sixth discourse. This is the possibility of the end of capitalism. And we know this has been a 5-year trend, and to imagine the end of capitalism, for many it's easy, for others it's the most frightening thing ever. So this now leads to the last narrative. So this is on the person I did my PhD, P.R. Sarkar. He argued that we need a new Renaissance. And the Renaissance has two parts. Those of you who know about the European Renaissance, challenge to dogma, allowing science and art to flourish. There's always been an Asian Renaissance as well. The Asian Renaissance has been about going deeper inside. As we panic, how do we slow down? How do we pause? How do we breathe? How are we mindful? So the Renaissance is about enlightenment. So there's two challenges now. Challenging dogma everywhere, here's how things should be, and challenging our inability to be mindful to find peace. So what does that mean for the global economy then? A new Renaissance is about a Gaian economy. For me, if there's 4 spheres of life, there's the economic, the spiritual, the social, and nature. Purpose, people, planet, prosperity. We need a quadruple measurement for all of our economies at the global level. Here's where we're going to go. So the search for the vaccine is pushing us in certain directions, and I welcome those directions. But as the narrative get deeper and wider, they're saying this is our chance to make a much more profound shift. Now, will we make it? It could be in a year from now, we're back to usual, business as usual, we're all doing what we used to do, everything is the same, but we got a warning, we didn't listen. So you see that with people's personal health stories, right? Someone gets a warning about their diet, about smoking, and they don't listen. This is saying we're getting a global, not a weak signal, this is a strong signal, we have to make the shift. So the Gaian Renaissance is saying this is about changing our purpose, moving from a single bottom line to a quadruple bottom line. If we don't, then basically this is a problem that will keep on coming back. This is pandemic number 2. Global financial crisis was earlier, well, SARS was earlier, even earlier was Asia financial crisis, then SARS and the global financial crisis, and now COVID-19. Watch out for the next one, it will be more distressing. So the framework for the deepest discourse change now, or in fact, things will get much worse. So that's essentially where I am with my research, looking at how narratives create reality. Find the narrative that makes the most sense and operate on that. Figure out what the story is, and our work in the futures community is, of course, to say what's not working. It's, of course, to anticipate the future. But it's also saying what narratives aren't working, what are the new narratives, and how do we create them? So that means developing anticipatory systems, and that means really putting people in real life situations. These are why we do foresight workshops, to get people to experience different scenarios, so when those scenarios occur, they're more futures enabled. They're calmer, they're in a meditative space, and they can make wiser decisions. Thanks so much. I'll move to the Q&A, I guess. So question number 1 is, are we heading to the movement where the democratization of finance emerges? Again, I try to work in scenarios. That's one possibility: open finance, open space, open source finance. But as again, scenario 2 is, once the crisis is over, we go back to what we knew. So that's one of those questions where people say, will this happen? I'm often unwilling to say, yes, this will happen. I can say, here are the scenarios, here's what I prefer, here's what we need to do, but to say this will or won't happen, that's kind of almost an irresponsible way of thinking. Question 2 is, what values are paramount for the next world that we need to deliver in the new narrative? I mean, clearly for me, what I've argued is there's the inner narrative, the inner enlightenment, and there's the outer narrative, the outer enlightenment. The outer enlightenment is very much what dogmas haven't worked, and if you go trace through what people are doing that's not working, it's pretty obvious in terms of people being in the same room together. And I don't want to really attack particular individuals or countries, but I think we all know what's going on. So the value of a course, we create the future that we measure. So you can have a workshop, you can do visioning, the future gets created by what we measure. We count what we count. So again, we're suggesting if we want different values, it's moving towards the measurement of prosperity, purpose, people, and planet. There's another question. I'm worried the possibility of single global narrative. How might we embed the right selection protocols for the many competing narratives that are emerging? So this is the issue of agency. The current narrative is, of course, the most narrow one, which is essentially what everyone is seeing, right? Stop the spread, flatten the curve, which is fantastic. Find the disease and cure, fantastic. And we're looking for deeper narratives. So our role is, how do we ensure that these deeper narratives don't fall out of the policy framework? Remember, if you're a prime minister, you're being every day, the urgent is hitting you. So we're saying, yes, the prime minister needs to respond to the urgent, but the wise leader is thinking deeper, not just solving today's problem, but it's anticipating tomorrow's problems and setting the frameworks to ensure that the future gets better. And this is, of course, the next question from my colleague Frank is, well, how do we ensure complexity? So this is the issue, is this predictive or not? So for me, when you enter this type of change, you enter plastic time. Plastic time is very clear. In plastic time, we can't predict what's next. We look at the initial conditions, we look at multiple variables, which is what I'm trying to do now. The 7 discourses are the multiple variables, right? And we want to go deeper, deeper, deeper. So we're embracing complexity, even though all of us understand in our personal lives, living in complexity is difficult. It's too much for people. So this is how do you develop anticipatory complex systems. So working with ministries, working with international organizations, solve tomorrow's problem, have the ability to deal with uncertainty so you can make wiser decisions. That's where scenarios come in. We're all trying to work on scenarios. Next question is, if the powerful and wealthy are motivated to maintain the status quo, how do you anticipate that might be a shift to capitalism? I think that's a fair question. People will be motivated towards keeping things as the same. The argument is, well, right now, why this has been so dramatic? I mean, the actual prediction of COVID-19, we know everyone got it right. I was running a workshop with hospital pharmacists in 2005. Their workshop was in 2020. A new global pandemic occurs called Aviana. So this is not a surprise. The surprise is in terms of the restrictions, that it's incredibly global and everyone's trying to work on it. So this suggests people understand everyone can be hit. We know certain genders are hit more. We know the comorbidities, but we also know everyone is vulnerable. In this case, of course, the rich and powerful are also vulnerable. So how do you make this a nonviolent transition? I think that's the thing. So can the rich see that their interests lie in deeper transformation? So if you just go from prosperity to the social, that may be not enough for them. So you might have to say, well, you have to go step by step. That's why the quadruple bottom line, which is a much more deeper type of world system, that has a greater chance. But certainly, I think the reasons why we won't shift are there. Scenario 4, the deep malaise will continue. Scenario 1, everyone in fear, what we call the zombie apocalypse, nation states fragmented into 6, 7 nations. That's also possible. The next question is, do you see a shift in world hegemons? And clearly, of course, we're all seeing that, right? I mean, Galtung has been writing about this in the 80s, Sarkar since the 70s, world system theorists have all been arguing. In a hegemonic shift, the old hegemon doesn't really want to leave, right? The old hegemon does everything he or she or he can to ensure the terms of trade, what's the global currency, the means of destruction lie in his power. In this case, we're seeing this is forcing a hegemonic shift, because hegemonic shift is about power, it's also legitimacy. The legitimacy of the current hegemon is being challenged on every front in terms of competency, incompetency, in terms of care, in terms of trust. So what could have been a 20, 30, 40-year hegemonic shift, now it moves much quicker. But again, no one can say for sure the hegemonic shift will happen or won't happen. We can say we can see the warning signals, we see the indicators, we see the likelihood towards the hegemonic shift. Working with narratives is more about thinking about the future, but how do we solve the present global problem? So again, in terms of narrative space, you're doing both. This is the challenge. Those you know horizons thinking, horizon 3 is the vision, your preferred vision within your agency, what you're able to do, what future you want. Horizon 1 is the current problems we're facing, washing hands, staying away from people, staying at home, doing what's right. We know that's right. Horizon 2 is the complexity, the unknowns, the narratives where there's a possibility of agency. That's what you want to be working on. So you want to practice doing that. The more repeated metaphors I see governments use to engage with the population is the war. So this is, again, of course, people go to the metaphors, the practices that make sense to them. I was in Pakistan in early March, and I went to the place I go to the gym, and as you enter the gym, of course, there was a gate, a metal detector to stop Taliban, etc., from coming in. They want to make sure the population is safe from extremists. So I went up to the guard and the other guards over there. I said, this is great, but you do know the next danger is not going to be from Taliban, it's from COVID-19. And he was puzzled. And I then understood that the narrative, the old narrative was operated. So the old narrative is the war. In this case, we need new metaphors. Is it the Gaian metaphor? So this is part of our work in the foresight community, the global progressive community, is what are some narratives that push the discussion, that change strategy? The war narrative activates people, has people focused, but I think we're far from sure it's the correct narrative given that we're all in this together. So that becomes crucial. What are some better stories? How realistic are we to likely get consensus on new alternatives for the future? This is the issue, right? Will we get consensus? Clearly, that's the debate now. When you're in a situation of plastic time, we amazingly got consensus on flattening the curve in most countries in the world because the threat was imminent. People felt nervous. No one wanted to be there when they lost power. So clearly, national leaders are more likely to act when their power is threatened. That's one option. Option 2, you have what you might call mindful, meditative, reflective, anticipatory leaders like the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's already thinking through new narratives. What's next? So they're starting to imagine their country in 2030. Is this a wake-up call? It may be. It may be, as I've suggested earlier, we go back to what we knew. I know the future I want, that this is a wake-up call, that the planet changes, but to say this will happen or won't happen, again, I mean, that's kind of a nonsense game. So the concern is they'll go back to business as usual. I think that's a fair concern. So the role of people in this group to say, how do I ensure business as usual doesn't occur? What do I do in my life to ensure that doesn't occur? What are some structural rules that can change, right? What are the legislative rules? How do we get international police? How do we get international health? Given the power dynamics, where we know some countries will be against us, I think that's for sure. Who will lead and fund this shift? The people, billionaires, or will democracy? I wish I had a simple answer to that. Clearly, it's going to be everyone, right? We clearly have many wealthy companies. We see the former head of Alibaba giving money to the vulnerable everywhere. We see the current head of Amazon doing the opposite. So billionaires will do what they feel. Clearly, we need world structural world laws to ensure that in a situation that no one wants world structures and laws, because they're worried about losing agency and they're worried about surveillance. So then you need interstate global protocols. This is forcing global protocols. Hopefully we'll say, as we did again after world wars, not again, not again. We need to do something else. So part of the basic question is narrative the overarching set of scenarios? So this is an important question in terms of what do we do next. So narrative is the story that we tell ourselves over and over. Narrative is a story we say, here's what reality is about, here's how we construct reality. So it's looking through the text, what are the stories that we're telling? And then you start to shift, is that the story that you want, or is there a deeper narrative? So narrative is a deeper level than scenarios. In my own work, this is the methodology of causal-layered analysis, or CLA. It goes deeper, looking at the metaphor, the myth level, the unconscious level of reality. So narrative ends up defining how we see reality. Scenarios can be narratives, but scenarios are much more broadening, where the alternatives, they're not deepening, but of course scenarios can also deepen reality. So I would suggest, what is your personal narrative? How do you transform that? In your community, what are some better narratives? And of course, in this talk I'm giving now, I'm mapping out the narratives and saying, here's the possibility of a much deeper narrative where people act because the issue is urgent and compelling. Are we getting to the globalization or disglobalization in the post-epidemic age? I would say both, of course. Clearly, none of this can be resolved without even deeper globalization, right? I don't think there's a question there. Global international protocols around movement, around anticipatory systems around pandemics, around the ability to act quickly, and around quick agreements globally. Here's how we all have to act. At the same time, many are saying, oh my God, I have to protect myself. How do I get away from the crowd? So I would say it's wiser globalization, which understands localization, deeper globalization, and far more even globalization, certainly a very different type of globalization than we're seeing today. There's another question. So is the crisis collapsing Horizon 1 with Horizon 3 considerations? In my work, I always say it's all three at the same time. I want to understand Horizon 1. What's the most important thing I need to do this morning? I always want to understand Horizon 3. What's my true deep purpose? Where do I wish to be in 10, 20 years? For every organization I work with at every level, it's a small NGO or a global organization in charge of international issues, we ask the same thing. Solve today's problem with focus, urgency, and always be aware of your true vision. Where do you wish to go? If you don't have Horizon 3, which is vision, purpose, then you're lost. Then you wake up, why do I continue? Every day is blasé. Horizon 2, of course, is a space of agency where you're playing with scenarios, methods, futures triangle, etc., to make a change. Another question is, the pull to remain where we are is proven to be so strong. What size bet would you personally place in the world? Actually responding to this latest warning. I wish I could tell you the answer. I mean, every crisis, we assume there'll be a major transformation. And of course, we know business as usual is easy, right? In the GFC, it went to a simple mortgage crisis instead of challenging the basis of the nature of the world economic system. So which bet would you place? I really can't answer that. The goal is really trying to respond, and you have to make your own personal decisions. We can do scenarios, like I said, zombie apocalypse, run now. The great pause, rest for a year, get ready for next year. The global awakening, and then of course the great malaise. I'm of course clear, where do I wish to go? If you know the work of visionaries who work at more spiritual levels, if you know the image of humans, the work Oliver Markley did in the 70s, he said the image of the future leads. The image of the future is first, then reality catches up. Narratives lead, we decide which story makes the most sense, then we operate from strategy. So this is getting very clear at the personal level, the collective level, what vision do we want? And of course, we know very clearly there's competing visions. When the vision is too far ahead, we get a pendulum shift back, right? We've seen that in the US, an extreme shift back. Will it stay that way? Most likely not. Most likely it will shift back again. But these are things that we don't predict. We analyze, we focus our work in terms of the world we want. What are the most interesting opportunities you are seeing in redefining the food meat system? Well, clearly for me, being part of this for 20, 30 years, 40 years, my first talk on the future of food was 1991, working for a company called Zippy's in Hawaii. And my recommendation to them was, okay, you're totally in the meat business. What about you move to the health business? What would tofu burgers look like? So then I've been watching that for now 20 years. I've been watching the move towards organic for 20 years. And now, of course, not surprisingly, watching the move towards the vegan movement. And now with the in vitro meat, cellular agriculture, beyond meat, that becomes quite foundational. Because it deals with pricing, it deals with taste, it deals with safety, and it deals with scale in ways that tofu and organics actually couldn't do. So I would say this is quite foundational. When I gave a speech at FAO in Rome, they were saying, this is fantastic, but we're not able to move as quick as the world is changing. So that's the challenge for most international organizations. They're fantastic. How do they become more futures literate, become more anticipatory, and also move as quick as the rest of the world system, as the rest of the world is moving? So that becomes almost the issue now. The world is moving quickly. International organizations have to catch up. They're not leading, they're catching up. We want to create systems where, in fact, everyone is, in fact, leading as well. What is the litany of the current scenario so basic and little organized at the global level? The litany of the current scenario is so basic. I don't quite understand that question. Maybe send it again. Do you think we need to invent new economic models, or should we look at promoting theories that already have some leverage? Clearly, donut economics is great. I mean, the one I've been working with 30, 40 years is from Sarkar Prout, which is basically neo-humanism, green economics. But his argument, you want innovation, you want new technology, not so we all work more, so we work less. You need a global economy that's localized in many ways, but you have a circulation of money rolling and flowing. The real answer to this at kind of strategy level, if you go too far from where people are, they won't understand what you're saying. If you're too near them, then they don't change. So you want a vision of alternative economics that pushes people out of their comfort zone, but not too far where they do nothing. So let me now try to respond to one or two last questions here. How can we create future thinking towards functional democracy and post-capitalism in a differential cultural society? I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? If you have many cultures, the argument why this may be decisive is because everyone feels the same vulnerability, irrespective of where you are. We're all being challenged. So certain cultures may lose legitimacy. Here's how we used to do things. We can't do them anymore. I keep on hearing it is not a black swan moment, et cetera, a gray rhino moment. So in terms of this literature, those of you who are futurists, I use the work of Graham Molitor, emerging issues analysis. You see the seeds of change. We've been seeing the seeds of change of this pandemic for at least 15, 20 years. Again, if you read that article, I posted the video on my website. So this is not surprising. the extent you could say there's some surprising things to it, but emerging issues analysis suggests the data is weak, but they're talking about it as a move from an issue to a trend to a problem. We can track it. How people respond is, of course, surprising. So I don't see this in any way as a black swan. It's that even though we see it coming, we're not prepared. This is the issue. How do we get policymakers to look at the surprising, to look at the unconventional in the way they're prepared? So if anything, this helps us become a more global anticipatory system. What narratives might resonate to the most to help us environment to sustainable future? Clearly, that's the Gaian narrative, right? That is, reality is not defined by my physical body. It's not defined by my nation state. It's defined by the reality we're all on the same planet together. That this virus, other viruses clearly show that. We're in a complex, self-organized, global, and if you're a spiritual person, a mindful person, this is actually a spiritual conscious system. Spirituality is not something weird. We're part of it. So this moves it towards the natural spiritual view. If you find that ridiculous, then you're more concerned, how do I get my prime minister, my minister to enact legislation for the next 5-10 years that protects nature, that protects people, that protects the economy? So it doesn't really matter in this case where you're at in terms of narrative. Find a story that gets you to act, that ensures agency, because the future we're seeing is there to change today. The future is there not just as a warning. So where can you make the difference? Where can I make the difference? How do we get international organizations to make the difference? So I'm going to stop there, and I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the questions. I feel I've gone over. 30 minutes is a long time to be staring at a screen, and I appreciate everyone's interest, and I'm happy to do this again, and I'm happy to answer the questions in text form if you prefer. But thank you so much for your willingness to listen, your questions. Thanks for your time. Bye.